phony talk about our founding principles and documents to Nancy Pelosi doing it. Right, if you were here this morning, you heard about the gag reflex I have every time she opens her mouth. He was fabulous. Andrew, of course, I paid tribute to this morning as well. And parents, cover your kids' ears here for a second. When I was at Right Online a couple of years ago, I said about Andrew's media empire, you know, that they're all named big. Big journalism, big peace, big government. And I said, cover their ears, that the next one should be named Big Balls. Because he has them. And there are very few people in Washington who have the same kind of courage and intestinal fortitude. And I think he's inspired an entire new generation of activists and citizen journalists who will carry on and are carrying on his legacy. God bless him. I'm going to keep my introduction, like me, short and sweet. And speaking of intestinal fortitude, our next speaker has it in a bottomless way. And I have very few people that I call heroes in the Beltway. And of course he's there, but he's not of the Beltway. And that is why he is so important to us. And that is why, as we've said all day long, Wisconsin is such a ground zero. It is also a breeding ground. You are breeding the next generation of fiscal conservative heroes and leaders and adults. It's also been said of Paul Ryan that he's a rock star Republican. Actually, yes. But I want to amend that a little bit because unlike the left, we do not subscribe to a cult of personality that is based on emptiness. The reason why Paul Ryan is a rock star is because of his actions, not because of his rhetoric. I know that so many of you became involved for the first time in the Tea Party movement and the grassroots movement that we have seen blossom despite all of the hatred and despair and vitriol that is lobbed at you by the left. I know that a lot of you were inspired, not just because you were disgusted by the culture of corruption that was brought by that Chicago team, but also because you wanted to hold the Republican Party's feet to their fire. We need politicians who don't just speak boldly and then act meekly. And Congressman Paul Ryan is somebody whose words match his actions. Please welcome Congressman Paul Ryan to the stage.
Good day to be in Wisconsin, huh? Michelle, thank you so much. And welcome to God's country. I tell you, I brought with me some good news and some bad news. In all these good news, bad news stories, it's better, I think, to go through the bad news first. All right? Here's the bad news. America's on the wrong track. We know this. We know it deep within ourselves. And if we don't change course pretty soon, the American idea could be lost for an entire generation. We could see the country that we know, the idea of the nation, which you just heard a phenomenal description of, slip into a path of debt, of doubt, of decline. We got a choice coming up. That's why we're here right now. We all understand this. And I've just got to say, it's going to be states like Wisconsin that are going to figure this thing out. We got a job to do on June the 5th, and let's not forget that. And we also have a job to do in November. And the nation's going to watch Wisconsin. here's the good news. The good news is we still have time to get this right. We still have time to get the country back on track. We still have time to turn things around. And this election is our big chance. We basically are at that proverbial crossroads. America's at that real precarious moment. And this choice of two futures that we have before us is ours for the making as people of this country. It's not going to be some backroom deal cut in Washington or Madison. We're going to make this choice. Do we want to go on this path of debt and decline, or do we want to renew the American idea? Now, the gentleman who just spoke before did a great job of describing what the American idea is. I'll bring it down even tighter than that. Our rights, they're ours naturally. They come from nature and nature's God, to borrow the phrase in the Declaration of Independence. They don't come from government. The idea of this country is that our government protects our rights so we can pursue happiness however we define it for ourselves, so long as we're not infringing on another person's right to do the same. We strive for equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. And so, this is a debate that's been going on for about 100 years. And quite literally, sort of has been running through Wisconsin. You know, progressivism and the Progressive Party was founded here in Wisconsin. We're familiar with this debate here. We were raised on these ideas and this different school of thought on natural rights versus government-granted rights, on a constitution of limited government and free enterprise versus this living, breathing constitution baloney that says it changes with the times. We have to have a government that creates new rights for us. Well, I got to tell you something. The battle between conservatives and progressives, or more accurately, between classical liberals and modern liberals, that battle is coming to a major crescendo this year. And this debate will not be completely won by one side or the other. One side will not totally vanquish the other in this year, but I've just got to tell you, because of math and because of momentum, they will set in place a trajectory that will be lasting for a generation. So the idea of this country versus its alternative idea, government-granted rights, living, breathing constitution, really big government, is going to be set in place in this election. Let me review why. Let's go through what I would call the bad news. Let's talk about the math, the momentum, and the man that is bringing this all about. Let's look at the math. Look, I don't want to go into a bunch of sterile review of spreadsheets and math and data, only to say that the kind of crisis we had in 2008, that one caught us by surprise. The kind of crisis that's coming, a debt crisis, we see it coming. And it's much worse than the one we just had. Take a look at what Europe is going through and magnify that, and that is what is on our horizon if we stay on the path that we are on. You know, all these smart economists and all these people who watch the world credit markets, they come and testify before the Budget Committee, and they tell us the same thing, basically. You got about 2 years, America. They know that you're in gridlock because of the kind of government you have in the federal government. You don't have a parliamentary system. But after this election, the judgment will be rendered on America. And it will be whether or not America gets its act together or not. The president just gave us a budget, knowing all of this information, that for the 4th time in a row, his 4th budget proposed to do nothing about this debt crisis. Actually, I take that back. He makes it a lot worse. He proposes to give us a budget with $1.5 trillion in new government spending, $500 billion in defense cuts. It's really the only spending cuts he has, but a $2 trillion tax increase. When you strip out the budget gimmicks and all the accounting tricks, the president proposes the bold action of reducing the deficit by about $400 billion over 10 years. Let me give you a sense of that. That's about $40 billion on average a year when we're racking up trillion-dollar deficits every single year. And even with all of this spending, all of these taxes he's talking about, they don't even pay for a fifth of the deficit spending he's proposing. The top tax rate in January, if President Obama has his way, which is coming in current law, the law he passed, Goes up to 44.8%. Now here's the deal. They would like you to think that it's just Prince Fielder and Aaron Rodgers paying these taxes. And I would be fine if it was just Brett Favre. Maybe Prince Fielder, I'm a little smart for that one too. Here's the problem. 9 out of 10 of our businesses in Wisconsin, 90% of the businesses in this state file their taxes as individuals. We call them subchapter S corporations, partnerships. It's all those employers out in our industrial parks that are hiring the workers we have in this country. Well, you know what they did overseas? Which in this state means Lake Superior. The Canadians just dropped the tax rates on their businesses to 15%, and Barack Obama wants the top rate on our successful small businesses to go up to about 45%. How on earth do you compete with that? To fuel all this more spending and borrowing. Look what happens if you turn on this health care law. The President's health care law, which takes 4 years to implement, we've just seen a couple of years of its implementation, and you've gotten just a small glimpse of what this law does. It is intentionally designed to require and to push and incentivize your employer to dump you from their health care plan into the government plan. And when that happens, we call it competitive dumping, costs will explode. It's a law that this year starts appointing the President's 15 political appointees, his 15 unaccountable, unelected career bureaucrats on this Medicare board that begins putting price controls on Medicare, which lead to denied access for seniors. It's a rationing board. All these things are being put in place. Now I gotta tell you, it's pretty easy to quantify the math of a tipping point that's coming of debt. A debt crisis will get us. A debt crisis takes down our economy. A debt crisis guarantees that our kids and our grandkids have an inferior standard of living. I asked the Congressional Budget Office, what's the economy look like going into the future? And they have this really sophisticated computer model. They run it for us every year. It's the one that everybody writes about. The computer crashes in the year 2031 because it can't conceive of a way in which the economy can continue past that point because of the debt path that we are on. So when our kids, are coming out of school, beginning to raise their kids, our government can't see how the economy can continue. So we can quantify the tipping point of debt. What is a little harder to measure is another tipping point, a more insidious tipping point, a moral tipping point, a cultural tipping point, where we become a society of takers versus makers. Now that's harder to qualify, but it's becoming easier. As you know, I'm kind of a numbers guy, so I like to read data. 49% of our fellow Americans don't pay income taxes. According to the Tax Foundation, 20% of Americans get 70% of their livelihood paid for by the federal government. They're totally dependent. Another 20% get 40% of their livelihood paid for by Washington. They're reliant. 70% of Americans get more benefit from the federal government in dollar value than they pay back in taxes. So you could already argue that we're over that point, but I don't think we are. But the momentum is clear. If you put this condition in place, you reelect this president, you turn on this health care law with all of its tax increases that are going to kill the job creators, stop job creation, have an economic stagnation, and have a debt crisis, do you think the American idea could survive all of that? Our society could take a very ugly turn. And so what we're witnessing is really what I would call a transformation of the opportunity society with the safety net, that American idea of prosperity and upward mobility, where we're turning that safety net into a hammock that is lulling able-bodied people into lives of complacency and dependency. It drains them of their will and their incentive to make the most of their lives. That's not what we do in this country. That's the cradle-to-grave welfare states that are riddled with the debt crises that we're seeing in Europe. And so I would simply say, this is a turning point for our country. And the trajectory we're going to pick in this year, because of the math and because of the momentum, is one that's going to last a generation. And if we take a look at what a man with the right kind of or proper rhetoric could do, he could finish it off. And that's why I see this is really a choice of the American dreamer now. You see, President Obama cannot run on his record. Drive by the next gas station you do, and you'll see something that starts with a 4. Look at the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate that measures people who stop looking for work and who are looking who can't find it, it's like 15%. He can't run on his record. And he's not going to change his tune. You know, after the last election, when the Republicans took the majority in the House, you know, a lot of sort of wise Democrats, guys from the old Clinton administration were telling us, he's going to triangulate, he's going to moderate, he'll do it just like Bill Clinton, he'll work with you guys, he'll moderate, and then he'll get reelected in 2012. You know what, we hoped that that would be the case. We wished that he would come to the middle and work with us. We got anything but that. He doubled down on his philosophy. This is not a Bill Clinton Democrat. And so if he can't run on his record, and if he's not going to change his tune and philosophy but double down on it, what does he have left? He is going to have to divide to distract. He is going to have to prey on our fears, our legitimate anxiety in this country by tapping into those emotions of fear and anxiety. Whatever you call that, that is not hope and that is not change. It's kind of like he's saying to people, look, you're stuck in your current station in life. You're a victim of circumstances outside of your control, and the government is here to help you cope with it. It's as if we're fixing some class in society. I gotta tell you something. We left these other countries to form this country that had those kinds of societies. The last thing we want to do is fix the in my family, the potatoes stopped growing in Ireland, so life wasn't working out so well there. They got on the boat, they came here, they worked the railroads until they had enough money to buy a farm. That ended up being in Wisconsin in the summer. They looked around, they thought it looked like Ireland, they bought it, and then winter came and they said, oh crap. We have to make this thing go. We've been here ever since. Look. When I was working the quarter grill at McDonald's on the interstate in Janesville as a kid, when I was detasseling corn, when I waited tables to pay back my student loans, I didn't think of myself as stuck in some class. I thought of myself on the way to opportunity. That's what So the president's going to give us what I call his ultimate straw man argument. He's going to say, these Republicans, they believe in this sort of Hobbesian state of nature, this social Darwinism, this dog-eat-dog society, that if you go with these Republicans, they're going to feed you to the wolves. All they care about is their rich friends who only get rich by exploiting the poor and taking from other people. And if you want any security in your life, if you want to be taken care of, you better stick with us. There's no alternative. That's just a bunch of baloney. I used to work at Oscar Mayer too, and that's a phrase we use there all the time. He's basically going to present himself as the great equalizer. And if you want to get a glimpse of what that kind of world looks like, he's already shown us a bunch of it. Look at the cronyism that you get with all of this big government. Look at the government picking winners and losers. Look at his financial overhaul law, Dodd-Frank. It's just going to end up with a bunch of big banks writing the rules for themselves and pushing the little guy out of the way. Look at healthcare. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, oversee healthcare. We say it's going to be BUCA. Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetna, and Anthem left. That's about the only insurers you're going to have left. And they're going to be like your public utility company. They're going to be like We Energies and Alliant, only providing you your healthcare. Government regulated and run insurance companies. You're not going to have any choices. The cronyism that comes with big government is not the American idea. And if you want to get a sense of the philosophy behind this, look no further than this issue surrounding conscience, which, by the way, has nothing to do with birth control. This is a sense of the philosophy that government now is in the business of defining and granting us our rights. And if those new government-granted rights ever collide, ever displace with our constitutional rights, like our First Amendment right to freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, then they will just have to be pushed aside in the name of progress. It's a vision that treats our constitutional natural rights as revocable privileges from our government instead of being the inalienable rights from our Creator that they are. He's done all this in an election year, in a tough election year. Imagine what they will do if they never have to face the voters ever again after the election. That's the bad news. Here's the good news, and I'll wrap this up as best as I can. If there's one thing I want to get through to you, it is not too late to turn this around. It is not too late to reignite the American idea. It is not too late to firmly reestablish our sense of a constitution with limited government and economic freedom. We can do this. The other number that warms my heart are the surveys that say we're still a 70-30 country. And not in the way I just said earlier. 70% of Americans believe in the American dream. Only 30% claim they want the so-called welfare state. So how do you jive that? How do you reconcile the fact that 70% of Americans want the American dream, where we see that 70% of Americans are more takers than makers technically in society today? It means we've got a bad economy. People are down on their luck, but they haven't given up. You know, I live in Janesville. I live in a block that I grew up on. I got 67 Irish Catholic cousins in Janesville named Ryan. It's one of the reasons why I can win in that town. But in my neighborhood, I got two buddies that I grew up with. Two guys that went to Janesville Craig with me who went and worked. We had a big GM plant there in Janesville until 2009. And these guys, like their parents, you know, they thought, John and Jim, they thought that they'd have this great job for the rest of their lives and have a really good life. And boom, in their 40s, rug got pulled out from under them. But they haven't given up. They went back to school. They went back to Black Hawk Tech. One of them's going to Whitewater to get new skills, new trades, and to get on to new businesses. One is an HVAC contractor. He's the happiest I've ever seen him. Another one's going to school to be a biology teacher. They're happy. They're taking it seriously. So there's a lot of people who are down in the luck right now, but they're getting themselves back. Meaning, most people in this country want to make a life that they can make for themselves. They see a horizon and they're shooting for it. And they believe that their kids will be better off. We believe in a society of upward mobility. We believe in a society where we make our lives for ourselves and we let our kids have a society that we make for them that is better than the one we got from our parents. That's what it's all about. But if we go down this path much further, if we allow the president to keep taking the country in the direction that he's taking it, these guys might give in. They might throw in the towel. They might say, enough, government, take care of me. We've got to watch that tipping point. And so we want to do something about it. I would simply say this. We don't like the direction the president's taking the country. And he inherited a tough problem, but he's just made it worse. We feel morally and legally obligated to show you a different path. And please, go to our website, budget.house.gov, and look at the path to prosperity we passed out of the Budget Committee last week, and we're going to pass this next Thursday. We're going to show you how we get out of a welfare state and back to an opportunity society. How we reform the welfare programs so they're not hammocks, but they're safety nets. We're going to show you how to cut $5.3 trillion in spending out of this government so we get our budget on a path to balance and our debt paid off. We will show you how to scrap this tax code and replace it one where Washington stops picking winners and losers and we grow our economy by letting people keep more of what they earn. We will show you a path to limited government and economic freedom that is true with our founding principles. And I've got to say this, in the face of the fierce demagoguery we're going to walk into, and which some of us are getting used to these days, I got to say this, the American system of limited government and free enterprise has done more to lift the people out of poverty than any other economic system ever designed in the history of mankind. So what do we do and how do we do this? We owe you a choice. Let the country decide in November what kind of country they want and what kind of people we want to be. And it's our job to give you that choice, to show you specifically how we apply these founding principles to the problems of the day, to create the solutions to get us there. We want an affirming election. We don't want to win an election by default. We want an affirming election. So that if and when we win this election, the American people consciously decide, I want the American founding ideal, I want natural rights, I don't want this gobbledygook social welfare state stuff, then if we win that kind of an election, we have the moral authority and the obligation to make it so. Look. A lot of us know each other. I see Laura, I see Donna, I see Lou, lots of friends. You know, our area is not deep red, deep blue. I mean, in the 1st Congressional District, Michael Dukakis, Al Gore, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama won. Now, remember, we beat John Kerry because nobody could relate to that guy. But this is a swing area. It's a swing state. It's a state that will determine the pathway forward for this country. It is one of those 10 electoral votes that are considered completely up for grab. We need an affirming election. And what we know is that the people of this state and this country are ready to be talked to like adults and not pandered to like children. We need to deserve victory. And let me simply say this. My favorite political figure in politics in Britain. That's kind of a narrow list there. Winston Churchill. He said, the Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing only after they've exhausted all the other possibilities. That is where we are right now. We need to deserve victory, and if we do this, and if we deliver Wisconsin, we will save the American idea. Thank you, everybody.